All right, so I had originally wanted to break these out into chapters for each post. Chapter 10 is only about 2 pages long, 2.5 maybe. And chapter 11 is only 6 pages, so I'm just going to combine those two. I'll have to fix the thumbnail, but it's fine. So we'll do chapter 10 and 11 right now. Chapter 10 is titled Parental Affection. Parental affection is perhaps the blindest modification of perverse self-love. The blindest modification of perverse self-love. So we love ourselves because it's baby, therefore it's perverse. Okay. But we don't really realize it. For we have not, like the French, two terms to distinguish the pursuit of a natural and reasonable desire from the ignorant calculations of weakness. Parents often love their children in the most brutal manner and sacrifice every relative duty to promote their advancement in the world. To promote, such is the perversity of unprincipled prejudices, the future welfare of the very beings whose present existence they embitter by the most despotic stretch of power. Power, in fact, is ever true to its vital principle, for in every shape it would reign without control or inquiry. Its throne is built across a dark abyss, and no eye must dare to explore, lest the baseless fabric should totter under investigation. Obedience, unconditional obedience, is the catchword for tyrants of every description, and render assurance doubly sure. One kind of despotism supports another. Tyrants would have cause to tremble if reason were to become the rule of duty, in any of the relations of life. For the light might spread till perfect day appeared. What a great quote. It's a little odd she's talking about parenting, but good quote. And when it did appear, how would men smile at the sight of the bugbears at which they started during the night of ignorance, or the twilight of timid inquiry? Parental affection, indeed, in many minds, is but a pretext to tyrannize. She's not lying. Where it can be done with impunity. For only good and wise men are content with the respect that will bear discussion. Yeah. A lot of parents, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Convinced that they have a right to do what they insist on, they do not fear reason or dread the sifting of subjects that recur to natural justice, but they firmly believe that the more enlightened the human mind becomes, the deeper root will just and simple principles take. They do not rest in expedience or grant that what is metaphysically true can be practically false. But disdaining the shifts of the moment, they calmly wait till time, sanctioning innovation, silences the hiss of selfishness or envy. Till time, sanctioning innovation, silences the hiss of selfishness or envy. Okay? If the power of reflecting on the past and darting the keen eye of contemplation into futurity, sorry, I added an extra syllable there, futurity, be the grand privilege of man, it must be granted that some people enjoy this prerogative in a very limited degree. So reflecting in the past and considering the future. Everything new appears to them wrong. Every new thing appears to them wrong, and not able to distinguish the possible from the monstrous. They fear where no fear should find a place, running from the light of reason as if it were a firebrand. Yet the limits of the possible have never been defined to stop the sturdy innovator's hand. Woman, however, a slave in every situation to prejudice, seldom exerts enlightened maternal affection, for she either neglects her children or spoils them by improper indulgences. Besides the affection of some women for their children is, as I have before termed it, frequently very brutish, for it eradicates every spark of humanity. Justice, truth, everything is sacrificed by these Rebeccas, and for the sake of their own children, they violate the most sacred duties, forgetting the common relationship that binds the whole family on earth together. Yet reason seems to say that they who suffer one duty or affection to swallow up the rest have not sufficient heart or mind to fulfill that one conscientiously. Sorry, I stuffed that. Yet reason seems to say that they who suffer one duty or affection to swallow up the rest have not sufficient heart or mind to fulfill that one conscientiously. Meaning, if you focus on one duty and you disregard all the rest, you can't even do that one duty correctly because you're, disregarding a bunch of important things. Took me a second, but I got there. It then loses the venerable aspect of a duty and assumes the fantastic form of a whim. Check on the baby as we read about parenting. Not quite asleep. As the care of children in their infancy is one of the grand duties annexed to the female character by nature, this duty would afford many forcible arguments for strengthening the female understanding if it were properly considered. The formation of the mind must be begun very early, and the temper, in particular, requires the most judicious attention, an attention which women cannot pay who only love their children because they are their children, and seek no further for the foundation of their duty than in the feelings of the moment. It is this want of reason is in their affections which makes women so often run into extremes, and either be the most fond or most careless of unnatural mothers. To be a good mother, a woman must have sense, and that independence of mind which few women possess, who are taught to depend entirely on their husbands. Meek wives are, in general, foolish mothers. Wanting their children to love them best, and take their part, in secret, against the father, who is held up as a scarecrow. When chastisement is necessary, though they have offended the mother, the father must inflict the punishment. He must be the judge in all disputes, but I shall more fully discuss this subject when I treat of private education. I now only mean to insist that unless the understanding of woman be enlarged, and her character rendered more firm, by being allowed to govern her own conduct. Unless understanding of woman be enlarged, and her character rendered more firm, by being allowed to govern her own conduct, she will never have sufficient sense or command of temper to manage her children properly. Her parental affection, indeed, scarcely deserves the name, when it does not lead her to suckle her children, because the discharge of this duty is equally calculated to inspire maternal and filial affection, and it is the indispensable duty of men and women to fulfill the duties which give birth to affections that are the surest preservatives against vice. Natural affection, as it is termed, I believe to be a very faint tie. Affections must grow out of the habitual exercise of mutual sympathy. Affections must grow out of the habitual exercise of mutual sympathy. And what sympathy does a mother exercise who sends her babe to a nurse, and only takes it from a nurse to send it to school? In the exercise of their maternal feelings, Providence has furnished women with a natural substitute for love. A natural substitute for love. When the lover becomes only a friend, and mutual confidence takes place of overstrained admiration, a child then gently twists the relaxing cord, and a mutual care produces a new mutual sympathy. But a child, though a pledge of affection, will not enliven it. If both father and mother be content to transfer the charge to hirelings, for they who do their duty by proxy should not murmur if they miss the reward of duty. Parental affection produces filial duty. Okay, that's the end of chapter 10. Chapter 11. Duty to parents. There seems to be an indolent propensity in man to make prescription always take place of reason, and to place every duty on an arbitrary foundation. The rights of kings are deduced in a direct line from the King of Kings, and that of parents from our first parent. Why do we thus go back for principles that should always rest on the same base and have the same weight today that they had 1,000 years ago, and not a jot more? If parents discharge their duty, they have a strong hold and sacred claim on the gratitude of their children. But few parents are willing to receive the respectful affection of their offspring on such terms. They demand blind obedience because they do not merit a reasonable service. And to render these demands of weakness and ignorance more binding, a mysterious sanctity is spread round the most arbitrary principle. For what other name can be given to the blind duty of obeying vicious or weak beings merely because they obeyed a powerful instinct? The simple definition of the reciprocal duty which naturally subsists between parent and child may be given in a few words. The parent, who pays proper attention to helpless infancy, has a right to require the same attention when the feebleness of age comes upon him. But to subjugate a rational being to the mere will of another, after he is of age to answer to society for his own conduct, is a most cruel and undue stretch of power, and perhaps as injurious to morality as those religious systems which do not allow right and wrong to have any existence, but in the divine will. I never knew a parent who had paid more than common attention to his children. I never knew a parent who had paid more than common attention to his children disregarded, meaning the parents disregarded. On the contrary, the early habit of relying almost implicitly on the opinion of a respected parent is not easily shook, even when matured reason convinces the child that his father is not the wisest man in the world. This weakness, for a weakness it is, though the epithet amiable may be tacked to it, a reasonable man must steel himself against. For the absurd duty, too often inculcated, of obeying a parent only on account of his being a parent shackles the mind and prepares it for a slavish submission to any power but reason. Agree. Don't listen to your parents. Or at least question them. I distinguish between the natural and accidental duty due to parents. The natural and accidental duty due to parents. Okay? Due as in D-U-E. Is there anything more annoying when, like, you're trying to open something with one hand, and it's just like, you know, it's not a hard thing to open, but you just can't get it with one hand. Maybe I'm just a weakling. But anyway, okay, the natural and accidental duty due to parents. The parent who sedulously endeavors to form the heart and enlarge the understanding of his child has given that dignity to the discharge of a duty, common to the whole animal world, that only reason can give. This is the parental affection of humanity, and leaves instinctive natural affection far behind. Such a parent acquires all the rights of the most sacred friendship, and his advice, even when his child is advanced in life, demands serious consideration. Excuse me. With respect to marriage, though after 1 in 20 a parent seems to have no right to withhold his consent on any account, yet 20 years of solicitude call for a return, and the son ought, at least, to promise not to marry for 2 or 3 years, should the object of his choice not entirely meet with the approbation of his first friend. But respect for parents is, generally speaking, a much more debasing principle. So respect, as opposed to affection. Is that what he's talking about? Or she's talking about? But respect for parents is, generally speaking, a much more debasing principle. It is only a selfish respect for property. The father who is blindly obeyed is obeyed from sheer weakness, or from motives that degrade the human character. Right, weakness because, like, if you actually wanted, like, if there's a good reason to obey them, you know, that would be through strength, not through, like, being a good person, having good ideas, being kind, etc. The father who is blindly obeyed is obeyed from sheer weakness or from motives that degrade the human character. A great proportion of the misery that wanders, in hideous forms, around the world is allowed to rise from the negligence of parents. And still these are the people who are the most tenacious of what they term a natural right, though it be subversive of the birthright of man, the right of acting according to the direction of its own reason. I have already frequently had occasion to observe that vivacious or indolent people are always eager to profit by enforcing arbitrary privileges, and, generally, in the same proportion as they neglect the discharge of the duties which alone render the privileges reasonable. This is at the bottom a dictate of common sense, or the instinct of self-defense, peculiar to ignorant weakness. Resembling that instinct, I lost the thread here a little bit. I have already very frequently had occasion to observe that vicious, the VI is on the cut off at the end of the line, and the CIOS is at the next line, so it was hard. I have already very frequently had occasion to observe that vicious or indolent people are always eager to profit by enforcing arbitrary privileges. Okay, I got that. And generally, in the same proportion as they neglect the discharge of duties, which alone render the privileges reasonable. Okay, so they enforce arbitrary privileges, but they also neglect any duties that would, like, make the privileges not arbitrary. That's part of the equation. This is, at the bottom, a dictate of common sense, or the instinct of self-defense, peculiar to ignorant weakness. This is at the bottom a dictate of common sense, or the instinct of self-defense, peculiar to ignorant weakness. Resembling that instinct which makes a fish muddy the water, it swims in to elude its enemy, instead of boldly facing it in the clear stream. From the clear stream of argument, indeed, the supporters of prescription of every denomination fly. From the clear stream of argument, okay, they flee from it, essentially. Indeed, the supporters of prescription of every denomination fly. Like, they like muddy waters. In taking refuge in the darkness, which, in the language of sublime poetry, has been supposed to surround the throne of omnipotence, they dare to demand that implicit respect, which is only due to his unsearchable way, they dare to demand that implicit respect. Oh, they dare to demand that implicit respect, which is only due to his unsearchable ways. His, capital H, God. But let me not be thought presumptuous. The darkness which hides our God from us only respects speculative truths. It never obscures moral ones. It respects speculative truths. It never obscures moral ones. They shine clearly, for God is light, and never by the constitution of our nature requires the discharge of a duty, the reasonableness of which does not beam on us when we open our eyes. The indolent parent of high rank may, it is true, extort a shew of respect from his child, and females on the continent are particularly subject to the views of their families, who never think of consulting their inclination or providing for the comfort of the poor victims of their pride. The consequence is notorious. These dutiful daughters become adulteresses and neglect the education of their children, from whom they, in their turn, exact the same kind of obedience. Females, it is true, in all countries, are too much under the dominion of their parents, and few parents think of addressing their children in the following manner, though it is in this reasonable way that heaven seems to command the whole human race. It is your interest to obey me, till you can judge for yourself, and the Almighty Father of all has implanted an affection in me to serve as a guard to you, whilst your reason is unfolding. But when your mind arrives at maturity, you must alone obey me, or rather, respect my opinions, so far as they coincide with the light that is breaking on your own mind. A slavish bondage to parents cramps every faculty of the mind. Mr. Locke very judiciously observes that if the mind be curbed and humbled too much in children, if their spirits be abased and broken much by too strict an hand over them, they lose all their vigor and industry. This strict hand may in some degree account for the weakness of women, for girls, from various causes, are more kept down by their parents, in every sense of the word, than boys. The duty expected from them is this, like all the duties arbitrarily imposed on women, more from a sense of propriety, more out of respect for decorum, than reason. And thus taught slavishly to submit to their parents, they are prepared for the slavery of marriage. I may be told that a number of women are not slaves in the marriage state. True. But then they become tyrants, for it is not rational freedom, but a lawless kind of power resembling the authority exercised by the favorites of absolute monarchs, which they obtain by debasing means. I do not likewise dream of insinuating that either boys or girls are always slaves. I only insist that when they are obliged to submit to authority blindly, their faculties are weakened, and their tempers rendered imperious or abject. I also lament that parents indolently availing themselves of a supposed privilege. Sorry, I had to turn the light up. I also lament that parents, indolently availing themselves of a supposed privilege, damp the first faint glimmering of reason, rendering at the same time the duty, which they are so anxious to enforce, an empty name, because they will not let it rest on the only basis on which a duty can rest securely. Reason? For unless it be founded on knowledge, it cannot gain sufficient strength to resist the squalls of passion or the silent sapping of self-love. Okay. But it is not the parents who have given the surest proof of their affection for their children, or, to speak more properly, who by fulfilling their duty have allowed a natural parental affection to take root in their hearts. The child of exercised sympathy and reason, and not the overweening offspring of selfish pride, who most vehemently insist on their children submitting to their will, because it is their will. On the contrary, the parent who sets a good example patiently lets that example work, and it seldom fails to produce its natural effect, filial reverence. Children cannot be taught too early to submit to reason, the true definition of that necessity which Rousseau insisted on, without defining it. For to submit to reason, it is to submit to the nature of things, and to that God who formed them so, to promote our real interest. Why should the minds of children be warped, as they just begin to expand, only to favor the indolence of parents, who insist on a privilege without being willing to pay the price fixed by nature? I have before had occasion to observe that a right always includes a duty, and I think it may, likewise, fairly be inferred that they forfeit the right who do not fulfill the duty. It is easier, I grant, to command than reason. But it does not follow from thence that children cannot comprehend the reason why they are made to do certain things habitually. All I'm thinking about is making my son brush his teeth before bed. For, from a steady adherence to a few simple principles of conduct flows that salutary power which a judicious parent gradually gains over a child's mind. And this power becomes strong indeed, if tempered by an even display of affection, brought home to the child's heart. For I believe, as a general rule, it must be allowed that the affection, why did I say that like the affection which we inspire always resembles what that we cultivate. It must be allowed that the affection which we inspire always resembles that we cultivate. So the natural affections, which have been supposed most distinct from reason, may be found more nearly connected with judgment than is commonly allowed. The natural affections which have been supposed almost distinct from reason may be found more nearly connected with judgment than is commonly allowed. Okay. Nay, as another proof of necessity of cultivating the female understanding, it is but just to observe that the affections seem to have a kind of animal capriciousness when they merely reside in the heart. Affections seem to have a kind of animal capriciousness when they merely reside in the heart and not in the mind, right? It is the irregular exercise of parental authority that first injures the mind, and to these irregularities girls are more subject than boys. The will of those who never allow their will to be disputed, unless they happen to be in a good humor, when they relax proportionally, is almost always unreasonable. To elude this arbitrary authority, girls very early learn the lessons which they afterwards practice on their husbands. For I have frequently seen a little sharp-faced miss rule a whole family, excepting that now and then Mama's angry will burst out of some accidental cloud. Either her hair was ill-dressed, or she had lost more money at cards the night before than she was willing to own to her husband, or some such moral cause of anger. After observing sallies of this kind, I have been led into a melancholy train of reflection respecting females, concluding that when their first affection must lead them astray, or make their duties clash, till they rest on mere whims and customs, little can be expected from them as they advance in life. How indeed can an instructor remedy this evil? For to teach them virtue on any solid principle is to teach them to despise their parents. Children cannot, ought not, to be taught to make allowance for the faults of their parents, because every such allowance weakens the force of reason in their minds and makes them still more indulgent to their own. It is one of the most sublime virtues of maturity that leads us to be severe with respect to ourselves and forbearing to others. But children should only be taught the simple virtues, for if they begin too early to make allowance for human passions and manners, they wear off the fine edge of the criterion by which they should regulate their own, and become unjust in the same proportion as they grow indulgent. The affections of children and weak people are always selfish. Okay. They love their relatives because they are beloved by them, and not on account of their virtues. Yet, till esteem and love are blended together in the first affection, and reason made the foundation of the first duty, morality will stumble at the threshold. Okay, yeah. But till society is very differently constituted, parents, I fear, will still insist on being obeyed, because they will be obeyed, and constantly endeavor to settle that power on a divine right, which will not bear the investigation of reason. All right, so that was chapters 10 and 11, and next it's chapter 12, which is on national education, and I think it's longer. So yeah, we'll go there next.